Hey, what's up? It's Miles. All right, so today it's not going to be like one of my typical videos, even though I don't really have a typical video because I literally just started this thing. It's a pretty raw conversation I had with my art director, Max, about what it actually took to build a really immersive and highly animated single scrolling experience for one of our clients. I wanted to share this with you all because in today's world where we have a ton of access to tools like Spline, Rive, and just generally speaking, what Webflow has opened up to all of us, we tend to forget about all of the details like performance, accessibility, optimizations, all of these kinds of things. Here's a conversation, and I hope you find some value in it. We want to show the people what it takes to make a website, or not even a website, but like a page like this. We realize that you can't just use all of these tools like fresh out of the box. There's a lot of playing and experimentation that really has to happen for it to be a production ready, client ready thing that like will actually function. So before we jump into all the technical stuff, the page in question is this. It's a narrative scrolling experience. It just starts with you're about to close in your first home at 123 Leaf Road, blah blah blah, right? And then as you scroll down, there's images loading in. You can see I'm controlling the scroll bar. We're kind of zooming into things. There's animations happening. There's things that are flashing all over the place. There's UI popping up. And this is just a continuous scrolling experience with live text on top of it, also kind of synchronized with what's happening in the background. It really just kind of takes you through this whole journey. Then we get these interesting kind of mid-section breaks that we can talk about in a little bit, because I think this was also a pretty clever solution. And yeah, there's almost like, I don't know how many scenes there are. I think like four scenes, maybe
Yeah, maybe
more,
five.
maybe five scenes that happens here. So it's not just like what you would expect from an Apple website where the phone is just kind of spinning around. This actually goes through different environments. Right now we're in this like UI view, right? Now it's a map view, and then it goes into, I think this is my favorite view, this house. And then as we scroll, yeah, you can kind of just see how it all evolves and all that good stuff. We'll leave the link in the description below so you guys can play with it. Where I want to start with, I think, is just probably the very beginning. We started with the client actually knowing or having an intention and basically providing us with a storyboard that they put together, I think in Google Slides or something like that. So that was really awesome to have a team like that that can get us started on the right foot, pretty much, giving us a ton of information right off the bat. And then from there, what happened next? So they sent that to us. I think you worked with, our team to talk about like the teams involved. I was kind of just overseeing the overall like creative direction of it. You were lead on the art and pretty much the whole production of this thing. We had our really close collaborators from a team called Wonder Up that did the 3D animation and some of the groundwork for the development. What was that process like getting from Google Slides into Figma?
First, we just wanted to see, does their story work? Like we know we wanted this like expansive page that kind of just felt like a continuous experience, but will it work with their outline that they gave us? So we kind of just do a storyboard just like you would an explainer video or something like that. And we went back with the client and there were some changes. Like at first they wanted it to be all about this character Artie, but then we changed it to talk about you because it's more like you going through the experience. So, there was content changes and then we had to, change images and, there's a lot of like HUD pop outs and things that weren't in their outline. And so we wanted to make sure that those were hitting the mark. And yeah, basically just going through like a normal storyboard, finding all of the highlights, creating those boards. Once we got approval on the main points and the main key focuses and the aesthetic, actually at first was even less slides than you're seeing. And then we needed to figure out how do we transition from scene to scene. And that's when we'll kind of like double the amount of storyboards in there to like show how it actually transitions. Maybe gets packaged up and moves up the page and we keep moving, or a wipe happens. So first, yeah, we just get the foundation down. Once we're really happy with that, do clean transitions. One, because you want to have like the user have a break. not be overwhelmed, but also clean transitions for the assets and like the actual like swapping of the files. Yeah, we thought through that, and then there was a lot of back and forth with the transitions, and then once we felt like this is where we want to be, we kind of moved on to the next part, which is animating, and once it's kind of like figured out at this stage and there's an approval, we go into production, and everything's kind of locked at that point. And we can just we can do tweaks here and there, but like the main moves have been figured out, so that helps us not spend a ton of time wasting time, because we have this step.
Yeah, so like the key points there is first figure out broadly what the idea or the story is, start to finish, and then put it down into kind of a just a few frames. Because yeah, in here what we're seeing here are like transitions, moves. There's a lot more frames that you're seeing here, but yeah, in the original I think it was just like the key moments that we
Five
designed, right?
five frames, yeah.
Yeah, I guess like what did that allow us to do? Was that just to get buy-in from the client that like this is the aesthetic and the style, or was it just to get an idea of what our scenes are?
Mainly to get an idea of what the scenes are, but then also lock in the aesthetic and the style. So we knew from the website that we had these AI scans, or scanning kind of through
Mhm.
line that we were going to hold on to. So then we also knew we wanted to use aerial images and aerial
Mhm.
graphics and punch, to be able to punch in and out of properties, and have like different elements, different HUD pop outs
Yeah.
that kind of like feel like AI is analyzing the property. But we can go back and forth with the client on the aesthetic and the foundation all at once at this stage, and then
Just
moving
those five
forward.
frames though, right? Like just in that
Yeah,
five frames, we're refining all of that. I think like that's a big point of we had basically a list of things we wanted to try and create. We tried to put all of those things onto these five things, these five frames to get buy-in from the client and see if it and
right.
internally too, like because we didn't know whether or not this would work and what it would look like. So from the very beginning of the project, we knew that we wanted something really unique and kind of a scrolling experience. We were pretty set on that. But at the same time, this could very well have just been an explainer video. But like, would that have been successful? Probably not. It wouldn't be as memorable.
This was a way as well to like make it feel like the user is using the app, and kind of
Right.
using Arturo and their services, instead of like when you watch a video you just kind of let it play. Here you're kind of going, you're making yourself go through it.
Cool. So we had five frames. We fleshed out all of our ideas, got buy-in, and then we added on more frames just to explore the interactions and all of that kind of stuff. At this point, did we have MP4s and videos?
That was the next step, was MP4s, and then we were kind of just playing with the idea of Lottie, and that's kind of how Lottie got brought up. Is how do we connect an MP4 to the scrolling experience without losing a lot of like fidelity, especially in text and micro
Mhm.
text. Lottie is a file format that, or JSON is, or really optimized for vector graphics. It like retains the sharpness. It's really light for vector graphics. The problem is it's really bad for raster graphics and MP4s and PNG sequences and images. It's just like not what it's intended for. That was kind of the main, like that was our problem, but also our solution, because we know we wanted to be with Lottie because we got the vectors, and we have a lot of vector animations happening. But we also know that there's a lot of raster images in here, and that would be a limitation going with Lottie.
I think the UI was pretty important to the client, and especially the data that you got. Of course, they're an AI platform. Like data, obviously, is kind of what they're all about. So the text here was really important to be legible, to not be the primary thing. Of course, like we have actual like content that that you would read, but all of the vectors and things like that that you would see in here, the UI, I think had to be really sharp, right? And I think that's why we kind of we're seeing like Lottie is a really good solution here. So at this point, we have the overall design. We have a really solid prototype, even. We have kind of the flow of this thing. But we all knew that we were going to run up against some optimization issues. And we didn't really even, I don't think, know up until this point how this was going to perform, on the web, because we were really trying to make sure that before we got on the browser, we knew how long the story had to be. Our hope was like we were able to implement everything that we had in mind, but I think we were also priming the client that we might have to pull back on some of these things, or we might have to do some kind of trickery here to make it happen. But during this phase, because we were keeping in mind like we're going to have to develop this at some point, we already had come up with these ideas of hiding the cuts, of like breaking up the files. It was never going to be the case where we were going to load up a massive Lottie file and you would just kind of scroll through the entire thing. I think we always kind of knew that we would like split this up into a few different files, right? And
Right.
some of the creative solutions that we came up with there are these kind of section breaks that happens here, where the previous Lottie file would end, and then you would just have plain HTML over here. Coming up with those breaks, was there any challenges there, or was it pretty obvious where that would be?
So there's two reasons we have these breaks. The main one is technical, and we want to do like a magician swap with the asset. But another really important reason is it's kind of time has passed. And so
Mm. Mm-hmm.
for the user, when they go into this like dark mode or black and white vibe, and they just get some text, it's almost like credits, or there's a period of time that
Like
has
a
passed for them.
curtain, yeah,
Yeah,
curtain closing, and
exactly.
yeah,
So like a break, I guess, really it is a break. You don't want to just be like everything's
mm,
flying at you and all the time, and then you kind of need a break. Okay, where am I now? Oh, inspection. Okay, this is what happens next. Boom. Now we can go. That type of break is really important in terms of like the storytelling aspect and just like how
yeah.
it makes a user feel. And then also we got to sneak in the magic asset swap, where we swap out one Lottie file for another. There wasn't just breaks in terms of that trickery. There's also like a frame that is still frame and will hold. Will swap during that still frame. So it's not always just a break. Sometimes I
Mm.
think we swapped it out with this image is here for a minute. Let's switch Lottie files here.
Oh, it wasn't just like, okay, the file completely ended, uh, and then it goes into black or whatever. It's like it's probably one of these frames actually, right? Where it's like
Yeah,
just
exactly.
just a static frame like this. This is all webflow, and then as you're scrolling, you've now swapped assets, and this
Now
kind
it's
of
a new
thing.
file, but it
Now it's a
feels
new
like the same
file.
file. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And then that's how we were kind of hiding a lot of that.
The main limitation here is time. And time is the limitation. It has to be long enough to tell the story, but also, not so long that the user is lost and the page doesn't load.
Right, right.
So
Yeah,
time
yeah.
was kind of the main problem to solve with this whole page.
I think the one thing that is successful about this is the solutions that we had weren't just like decisions based on a technical limitation. It was mostly we like took into consideration how it fits into the narrative. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just like, oh, we have this technical limitation, so let's do this fallback. It was like, okay, how do we come up with a fallback that makes sense in the storytelling? You know what I mean? Like this curtain
Mm-hmm.
closing and stuff like that is a big part of that. And I think those are the types of decisions or details that you need to have so that the experience feels seamless, and it feels kind of like a lot higher quality and not really jarring, because a user can tell if something kind of changes because of a technical thing versus something that's a little bit more I don't know, embedded in the story. So the user's just kind of lost in the story, and they're not really paying attention to the fact that, oh, this asset is leaving and now I'm seeing a new asset. It's just kind of the time is passing, like you said. So that I think that's like really, really awesome. So what we're seeing here is kind of a mixture of static images, UI, but then, there's 3D as well in here. Can you talk about, one, what were all the apps that we used to like make these things, and what were some challenges there?
So this was done in Cinema 4D and After Effects. After Effects is where you need to be to export JSON files. And then for 3D, you need to be in a 3D software. So the Cinema 4D is the one we pick and we like to use, but you could have made it in Blender or anything else. The main issue with like Lottie and 3D renders or even live action, if you try it, because Lottie doesn't want you to render, put anything in there that isn't vector, basically. If it's live action, if it's renders, you need to actually take the MP4 or the MOV and export out individual frames for each PNG, and then re-put it back into After Effects as like a comp that kind of separates each frame, so then it can load it up into the Lottie. So that's something you have to do. There's a step where you have to kind of export out the PNG sequence and then import it into After Effects, but have it, be 1 second each. The other thing is Lottie. They have their own Lottie Files app that you use as a plugin in After Effects. And it doesn't work. So it will work if you if you're using like vector. They don't want you to do what this is. They don't want you to use live action or renders or anything like that. So what you need to do is get body moving, which is kind of like the OG Lottie files. You need to get body moving, and you need to get like the most up to date version to get this all going.
Working within Lottie was really kind of challenging because, yeah, while the file size is really small to begin with, that doesn't really mean that, you can just export it out of After Effects, get the JSON, put it into Webflow. Doesn't mean that that's just going to be a smooth process, because even with Webflow, there's some limitations on how large your Lottie files can be. And of course, when you're dealing with something like this, your Lottie files can be pretty massive, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
mean, we had
and
5 files here, or 4 files, 5 files. Each one was like around 25 megabytes. Um, and
that's
so just to put it into perspective, like our goal was to get, and eventually, just for the desktop version, we eventually got them down to like around 5 to 10 megabytes. So from 25 megabytes to 5 megabytes.
huge.
That's the kind of optimization we were doing for desktop. And then, then you're talking about mobile, and it was the same thing there. There were like 15 to 20 megabyte files. And we knew we had to get it way, way, way down. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that I think we'll get into mobile in just a second, but for everyone watching, we had to make a totally separate experience on mobile to make it just functional, even because it was so heavy. Um, and yeah, so we can get into that in just a second. But even on the desktop side, so we did a bunch of kind of optimizations and tests. You can kind of see, and you can open up other, web experiences similar to this one, where you'll see that while it is quote unquote optimized, they're still serving you files that's like, yeah, like Max was saying, like 25 megabytes, which is like insane. Like, who's gonna sit around for that? And so when you're looking at, I think this is, let me see if I can find one. Yeah, like some of these are, this one's 29.8 megabytes on one of them, because I'm like connected to my Wi-Fi, or I'm actually hardline, I'm able to load this page like really easily. A lot of people will kind of just know that, oh, Webflow can do Lottie, so I'm just going to load up whatever Lottie I want, and then make it kind of look nice on mobile, and then call it a day. But the problem there is, like, if you've loaded up a 29.8 megabytes on desktop, even if it looks nice on mobile, when you actually go outside without a data connection, there's no way that's going to load. We tried a few things as far as like optimization, because like we're kind of saying like, yeah, we optimized the crap out of it. How did we actually optimize it? How do we get from the original export that was like super large to where we eventually ended up on desktop to start with, and then we can talk about the craziness that happened with mobile.
Yeah. So for desktop, it was a little more straightforward because we have a little more room. Mobile, it's kind of like ridiculous to even think that this solution would fit. For desktop, it's more realistic, and so it wasn't as difficult. We didn't have to strip away as much, but being cautious and of the animation ideas and where can we pull back, where can we just kind of maybe leave it. Maybe we can do so when we zoom into that house and it takes 130 frames, 130 frames. And Lottie is taking 130 of those 4 megabyte frames times 130. Like that's like literally how it's working. So if you don't get each one of those frames down to a tiny size, that's, times 130. So what we had to do was optimize that, but then optimize the amount of frames that you're seeing. So maybe we can zoom into this house in actually 50 frames, and we don't need
Mm.
to zoom into that house in 130 frames. So we were doing stuff like that, and we kind of went even turned up the volume even more for mobile. And
So
for
what is the
mobile,
trade-off though? What is the trade-off for that kind of optimization where you're no longer, so there's like two things, right? Like you can optimize the asset itself. So like we said, this stuff is like a flip book basically. So you got a whole bunch of, little images and it's all kind of playing right after another. I mean, that's just how video works, I suppose, but that's also kind of how it works in Lottie. And we ran it through, did we run it through Kraken for this project? I
yeah,
think we
so
did, yeah,
we
right? Like,
eventually did. We eventually optimized it because there was a
yeah.
lot of bugs with Mac, so that as well
Yeah,
was.
right. That's a whole nother thing too. Okay, so each each image we compressed it using a tool like Kraken, which if you guys don't know, this is an awesome tool to optimize your images. It's pretty lossless to an extent. So there's that where you just kind of reduce and crunch the files. But then the more extreme way is the lossy version, I suppose, where you literally start chopping out frames and dropping the frames. Um, Now, what's the trade off there, and how do you decide? I guess to do that, and like, yeah, what's involved in that?
The trade off, unfortunately, is smoothness. So
Yeah,
you'll have more smoothness with more frames, but you also have like ridiculous sizes. So it's almost like how many frames can I get rid of before it's not smooth enough for me. So like for us, it was kind of like where do we draw the line? Because where does it feel like oh this is just broken, and where does it feel like that's smooth enough?
yeah.
And it sometimes is only a couple frames difference between that. So we kind of just like kept playing with it until we realized that
So you go by feel. You
yeah,
you basically, there's no like yeah, there's no kind of formula to it. It's you got to just try it, right? It's like kind of
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and so like just like to hop around a little bit since we're on this part, but like the zoom in, say this is 50 frames or 60 frames or whatever, the zoom in that happened on mobile, it's a similar zoom in. It was 5 frames. So now we're going from 60 frames to 5 frames to get the same kind of vibe. And we'll show you that. But what you basically do, or what we did is like, so most of the time when you're zooming into this house, you're kind of like in the belly of the animation where it
Right,
doesn't make that much of a difference. But once you start like rounding the corner of the house, that's where those changes are more apparent. So we
right.
kind of like kept the frames focused on the beginning or the end, and the middle we can kind of take a lot out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same concept as like easing, and if you're familiar with like easing curves and things like that, where we're like kind of speed ramping almost in the beginning or slowing
Yep.
down in the
Exactly.
beginning and end, to get that smoothness, basically. Taking a look under the hood really quick. One, I think it was important for us to have live text here, and not just be all baked into into the graphics. One, because like there's some edge cases with your browser sizes, we don't want it getting cut off. And then also, from a content perspective, we needed the editors to be able to like manipulate some of those things. While we're in here, also, I can kind of show um, some of the custom code that basically had to happen. So here you can kind of see we have Lottie frame, and then we had our text containers, and then some like background stuff here. So you can see both the text and then the frames, the Lotties, were in different places. Um, we had to do some kind of custom code to make this stuff work on mobile. So now let's talk about kind of like how we made the mobile experience happen. Is of course we couldn't load the full desktop files on mobile. So Napu from WonderUp kind of helped us out with some code here on being able to essentially have a detection on the browser window if it's, you can see here, greater than or equal to 992 pixels, then show this particular asset. If it's not, if it's less, then hide that asset essentially. um, and the reason why we had to do it through JavaScript is because it's not just this hide and show display that you have here on Webflow. All this is doing is literally like, it's like an opacity essentially. That means that the browser still has to load that, right? So like, even if you have it hidden on your DOM, it's called your document object model, it's still there, and the browser's still going to see it and be like, oh, I got to load that thing. So what we had to do is we had to literally like delete that from the browser so that the browser doesn't load it. And that's where kind of this JavaScript thing had to come in. We couldn't just strictly rely on display none on it. Which means also we had to have two completely different files from mobile and from desktop, of course. And the aside from like the files being completely different, another thing that was different about them, of course, were their aspect ratios, right? Like so. On mobile, the aspect ratio, of course, was portrait, and then on desktop, it's more, landscape looking. Um, but now let's kind of talk about mobile versus just like mobile and what our experience there was, because we launched the website with basically V1, let's say, of this experience where it was loading on mobile, but as we got it out there in the wild, as people were using it, and it was optimized, right? Like we did all the things we talked about, the same techniques we talked about on the desktop, we applied to mobile, where we cut some frames, we really optimized things. Of course, now we're serving a much smaller file size, so that helped a lot. So at this point, we were thinking, I think we're in the clear. It's working really well on Wi-Fi and or on our mobile, but we're on Wi-Fi, right? And as people were using it, in different network conditions, it started to freeze, and it would basically just like hang and like get stuck. Just all sorts of different things would happen where sometimes you can't scroll at all, sometimes you could scroll and you can see the content, so it was just kind of like all over the place. And then that's when we knew that we had to kind of go back and figure out a fallback or a solution to this. Yeah, and what was that experience like? Yeah, if you want to kind of talk through that.
Sure. I mean, so we were happy with the mobile, and then yes, we
Yeah.
we were like getting these notes that certain people's devices aren't handling it. So of course, I turn off Wi-Fi and getting trapped in black holes, and it's just timing out all over the place. So we kind of were like, what do we do? What we normally do is have like a fallback that is static, completely static, and doesn't have any animations on it at all. And will just kind of like be maybe just images, a slider, kind of a different solution altogether. But the client and us, we wanted to keep this like scrolling mobile solution or scrolling solution on mobile. So we're like, what can we do? the thing is like, having two files obviously is key. One, for responsive reasons, like Miles was saying, but also like being able to now, mess with this mobile version, and doing it from a base already that is
Yeah.
already reduced from the desktop version was helpful. But it was still, our files there's four files. They're each like 15, 20 megabytes. And then we kind of did a bunch of testing and realized that out of the four files, they each need to be like at most a megabyte. So from
Yeah.
going to from 15, 20 megabytes a file to 1 megabyte or less for each file was the goal. So we put up, some boundaries. The boundaries is, what do we actually want to do? We wanted to be as close to the desktop solution, but obviously be under that size limit. So some of the things is like, we just want a focus point that's always animating, always moving, so it doesn't feel broken. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, as long as there's something moving and there's a focal point that is animating, or the text is coming by, that it's going to feel kind of close to the desktop. The other, goal was to keep the text sharp. So now you're not on desktop, you're on mobile, so even a smaller screen, so you have even smaller text. So when you start to do solutions like rasterizing things, it's blurry, and you wouldn't be able to read any of it.
Mm.
So the text that is in a focal point needs to be vector, and it needs to be, in the Lottie file as vector and not flattened. And then the other goal was, we want to be able to load this, without an internet connection, like no Wi-Fi, no, you just, your data plan, whatever it is, and we can load this. And then, so we were doing a couple versions. All right, maybe we just do it static. We just have the images changing. And then I kind of got the idea to, let's just see how far we can push it. And let's remove everything that is heavy, and let's keep everything that is efficient and, approved by Lottie. So that means all the vector stuff. And then obviously you need to have an image in the background. So any image that was like mandatory, let's just flatten and optimize and reduce and then keep it there. And then so it's just vectors, and it's just the flattened images. And let's see what size we come at with that. We come out of with that. So we kind of saw that, we're getting really good sizes, but it also is feeling like a little flat. Maybe we can start adding in some raster animations and adding in, more stuff. So we started to add in, animations where we could that were raster, continually just like exporting to Lottie and seeing, what that size was. And I was kind of targeting 1 megabyte, but we also knew that we would eventually just purchase the subscription for Lottie, which allows you to go a little further in optimizing it and do something called a dot Lottie, which is basically Lottie, but half the file size. So, by targeting a megabyte, we actually have 500 kilobyte file sizes in here now. So there's four like 500 kilobyte-ish sizes. And that's really just, keeping the vector. Anything. So in the desktop version here on the dashboard, all the dashboard was animating, and all the things, those were all vector. So technically we can keep it because it's optimized and efficient. But for this view, it added way too much weight, even being vector. So what we had to do is actually just make it all one raster, and the iPad moves. So you feel like, and you're still having that experience, but now you're not like getting the dashboard, load in that was happening on desktop, which is like unfortunate. But on this scale and for the story, it's not as important as like, everything else. So it's just having like a clear sense of like the priority of what needs to be on the screen at that time. And then, being able to strip out, what you can when it comes to raster, and then being able to bring it back when you realize that you're at a good point. And that's kind of how we landed on these sizes, which are super optimized. Like I was saying, 500 kilobytes each.
Yeah.
And then,
And
so if you
yeah,
want to like show the zoom into the house, you can kind of see how like 50 frames goes to 5 frames. So we punch in here and scroll. Yeah. So see how it feels like you zoomed in, but it also
oh
just
yeah,
like felt like an animation,
yeah,
like a
yeah.
digital zoom. And that's because we just used 5 frames to do the little house flip instead of 50, 60
You
frames that
still get that
traditional zoom.
feeling of like diving into it, like the same exact thing, but just not as obviously not as like crazy cinematic. But honestly, it's still just if
You
we
get the
didn't tell
vibe,
that to
right?
people, yeah, you get the vibe, and it's so close that if you didn't tell that to someone, they would never really pick up on that because at the end of the day,
Right.
yeah, you still just get the vibe and um, no one's like being like, wait, that's not exactly how it is like in desktop. What's happening there? Yeah, the vibe is like totally there. And I think someone might ask like, okay, how do you decide or uh, how do you like strip away some of that and maintain the vibe? Um, I think, yeah, I don't know. Like, what was your thought process there? Was it just experimentation and just playing with it and seeing like, oh yeah, that's the same similar feeling, or did you have more of a formula of if we're punching in, let me just zoom in, or I don't know. Yeah, like, what was
Yeah,
your?
I get you. It was actually a lot simpler than that. It was take out everything heavy and see what we have. And
And that's
once
raster
I
images are heavy,
Yeah, all the
like yeah,
any animation that is a raster animation, so a PNG sequence, just like turn
yeah,
the eyeball off and do an export, and see, let's turn off everything but the vector, and then once we see the animation, or the Lottie file working how we want, or not how we want, but with everything removed, we can start being like, this is what we're missing. This is like what we would like
yeah,
to add back in, and it becomes very clear like what you want to add back in. Once you can kind of see like all of the heavy
yeah,
stuff removed, and you can be like, you know what,
yeah,
I need this iPad, but I don't need the little intricate moments inside of the iPad, but I
right.
do need the iPad to animate. So, just like, yeah, prioritizing the key focal points, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we finally started kind of showing this to the client, because there's like a level of this too where it gets a little bit too technical to have to like explain things to a client, and also they don't need to
They don't
know
care.
about half of these things. Right? Yeah, it just needs to work, right? And there was a point where so this is the static version, right? So this was like if we literally removed everything and just had images, basically, what does that experience look like? In some ways, I think, I still think it works, right? Like, if we had to serve this to like a 2G, 3G demographic or something, um, I think this is a good compromise, right? And you get the experience, the scrolling is still there, some of the text effects are there, but it's for sure pretty static. Um, the reason I think why we kept pushing also is because there were moments in our code where you had to keep scrolling. So like here, right? Like there's this dead space. I'm scrolling right now, and nothing is kind of happening. And if I keep scrolling, then it appears. And there was a point here where we could think about redoing our code a little bit, but then there's a push and pull because okay, that might impact the desktop, right? Or we might now have to restructure certain things. So we also didn't really want to. A big goal here, I think, for mobile was like we didn't want to redo our structure. Like I didn't want to
Right.
have to, create a totally new, layout or a totally new thing. We wanted to keep everything where it was and just rely on, normal responsive things to make this whole thing work. And so because of that, we ended up with these like dead spaces almost. And for sure, we could have like added more images there, but that started to like introduce. Okay, well, if we're adding more images, what else can we add? Like maybe we can start fading things. Maybe we could do this and that, and then that would eventually kind of rippled on into, the solution we have now, which is like full on, there's zooms, there's like all this stuff kind of happening that made the experience a lot better, and it is worth that extra effort. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, if you like this conversation and this type of format and want more of it for some reason, let me know in the comments below, and I'll share a lot more of these kind of internal conversations that me and my team has. All right, I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing and liking and all that good stuff. See ya.